Welcome to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast, brought to you by the Sales Enablement Collective. Each episode, we sit down with sales enablement and revenue leaders from around the world and invite them to share their expertise and experience with the community. On this special episode, recorded live at the Sales Enablement Summit in London, we spoke to Simon Gilks, VP of Revenue Operations at Enhesa, about the important relationship between RevOps and sales enablement.
Thanks, Simon, for taking the time. Really appreciate it. If you could sort of kick things off by introducing yourself to our listeners a little bit and giving us just a brief overview of your experience in enablement and sort of what you're doing now.
Yeah, so my name is Simon Gilks. I'm currently at a company called Enhesa. I'm the VP of Revenue Operations there. But for me, enablement is a part of revenue operations. It always has been, and I sort of run RevOps teams at 4 different companies now, and every single one of those, enablement is probably one of the most critical pillars of that sort of revenue operation structure. And from a personal experience bit, I've sort of built the teams, but I've also done the job as well. Like I've been there and I've built the content, built the training, delivered the training, you know, whether that's in a spreadsheet or using a system. I've sort of been hands-on with pretty much every aspect, but now I'm fortunate enough to still do that, but manage a team of people doing that as well.
That's really cool. And I guess then you're the perfect person to ask in terms of what should the ideal relationship between RevOps and enablement look like so your dream world and sort of getting that perfect. Obviously, you said sort of one of the same in a sense. So how do you sort of approach that relationship to make sure that?
Yeah, I'm biased, right? And maybe it's a popular or unpopular opinion, but for me, enablement is a part of revenue operations. And I wouldn't accept a job where enablement wasn't a part of operations. I've had companies talk to me about jobs previously, and they were like, well, which one do you want to do? Do you want to do the ops or enablement? And I don't want to do either. I want to do both. So for me, they are absolutely critical. Like if I think about operations and the core bits from an ops perspective, you've got the systems, you've got the process, you've got the data, the planning, but all of that's meaningless if you don't have a function or a team that can bring it to life. And that's where enablement comes in. So you can have the best system in the world, you can have the best process in the world, the best data in the world, but if you don't have anyone that can make it a reality, if you don't have anyone that can, the people that use it, make it a reality, make it their life, make it their day-to-day, then it's flawed. And that's the same the other way around. Like you can have the best enablement function in the world, but without the right systems and processes and data in the background, you've got nothing to enable against really. So that's why for me, they go hand in hand. However, I'm aware that that's not the sort of reality in every organization. So they have to be absolutely strategic business partners. If they're not, they have to be joined at the hip. And the risk of them being separated is that enablement becomes an afterthought. So that's where, for me, that relationship has to be cemented by common goals, common objectives, and that has to start right at the top of the business and flow all the way down. That way it helps sort of cement them and bring them together, because otherwise you do end up with 2 siloed teams that have to go hand in hand and actually don't go hand in hand, because it's really easy, because they're different people, different mindsets, different personality types that you end up sort of, drifting apart. Like if you think about systems or a data person compared to a trainer, they are worlds apart in personality most times. And that's why it's really easy for them to drift apart. So they have to be brought together either as one team or through common objectives.
That's really interesting. I like the point about personalities as well, because it's probably not something that people always think of that often, but it's actually, like you said, really important.
People are the most important part of everything, right? And sometimes you overlook that because you look at the skills, you look at the experience, you look at the CV, you look at what they do. But you have to think about the people, because they're what brings all of it together.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess in terms of actually building up that relationship so that they can be joined at the hip, where does that start, and where can you, if someone's listening to this and maybe doesn't have that joined at the hip connection that they need to have, how do they start sort of building that out, and I guess what do you do to build and maintain that relationship?
I think it comes back to that sort of last point. It's around the goals and objectives, and I was talking about this with someone earlier. So many people perceive that they're aligned, and I think that word sort of perceived is really important, because just because your CRO and CMO, for example, have sat in a meeting together and they've built a business plan together, doesn't mean they're aligned. And if they're not aligned, then you're never going to be aligned underneath that. So by having those sort of common goals and objectives that start right at the top of the business and flow down through the business is the absolute starting point. I talk about integrated planning a lot. And integrated planning for me is the input to an integrated communication strategy. And by that I mean, we're all saying the same thing in the same way at the same time. And if you don't have the integrated plan, and RevOps have a plan, and Sales Enablement have a plan, and sales have a plan, and marketing have a plan, like you're instantly reinforcing silos within a business, and you're forcing people to work independently by bringing it all together and thinking about the customer, put the customer at the forefront of it. And how do we best engage with our customer? How do we do what we need to do to win more business, retain our business? Then you have that one plan. And if you've got the common goals, the single plan, you're all working together on it. And like I said, that avoids the afterthought bit, which is normally where enablement and RevOps butt heads. I've been there, I'm guilty of it. Like we've all done it, where I may be implementing a new piece of technology and my sort of completion date is go live date, where that's absolutely not completion. It's so much more than that, and that's where enablement come in. But if you don't think about them and they are an afterthought, they're going to butt heads, and you're just going to create that sort of separation between them. And if they separate, they both fail.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess on those sort of that theme of common goals and having that unified, does that come down to metrics as well, and sort of matching up the metrics that you're sort of tracking across?
Look, I'm a big fan of the sales velocity equation, right? And everything I do within my team, you have to be able to tell me which part of sales velocity is going to impact. And some initiatives will impact all four, some will impact one, right? But if you can't clearly articulate to me why we're going to do this and which lever of sales velocity it's going to pull, then I'm going to ask you why we should be doing it. And that then happens from an enablement and an ops perspective. But it's really, it helps bring them together, because if ops are able to say, we're doing this process change, we're implementing this system because we know it's going to lead to increased opportunities or increased win rate, reduced sales cycle, then enablement know what they're doing and what their aspect is and what lever they're trying to pull. So I think that's really important. But also, I think from an enablement perspective, like metrics is quite a sort of a vague and elusive subject at the moment. And I remember interviewing someone a few years ago for an enablement role, and he said something that stuck with me. And I said, what are the metrics that you hold yourself accountable to? And he said, whatever my customers want. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, if I'm doing an enablement program for a sales manager, I need that manager to be able to tell me what he's trying to achieve with that program. Therefore, they're my metrics this week. And there's always underlying metrics like sales velocity, but the actual program itself should dictate the metrics. What are we trying to achieve with this? Because if we don't know what we're trying to achieve, we shouldn't be doing it. So understand what we're trying to achieve, have the clear metrics in the outputs, and then you can separate those across enablement, ops, and any other function that's involved, which again will help bring them together.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you ever experienced maybe where on that sort of the varying metrics on a project-to-project basis, that maybe that clashes with sort of the leadership's want for a hard number, or does the sales velocity sort of help you approach that?
Sales velocity helps, but I think that actually comes down to the sort of the charter of enablement or the charter of ops or whatever it is you're talking about, because like most CROs, right, and enablement's biggest customer is always the CRO. Most CROs have never done an enablement role. They normally come from the sales manager, director, VP sort of role. So they've not lived and breathed it. They have a perception about what enablement does. And in their eyes, it's like, well, you're going to help me get my reps to hit target and you're going to reduce ramp time, which are two of the most common metrics that everyone talks about, and they are valid metrics. But underneath that, there's a million other layers. Like, cool, we're going to increase quota attainment from 60% to 80%. Well, what the hell am I going to do underneath that? And that's where you need to break it down. And that's where those individual sort of project or program metrics help support and roll up into that. So it's about understanding all the layers, because there is a top line number. Like ultimately, enablement exists to make people as effective as we can so that we can hit our numbers and grow. That's what we exist for. So underneath that, like what are those levers, and breaking that down. And for me, it always goes that top line to sales velocity, and then you break sales velocity down into individual programs, which then all roll up together.
I really like that, especially that point of bringing the layers down. Actually, it breaks down to something a little bit tangible. I would say sales velocity is your number.
It's the same as like Like, I'm a cycling and a Formula One fan, right? And if you think about both of those sports, it's marginal gains. It's shaving half a second off your pit stop time. It's doing this, it's doing that. And that's what enablement is. Like, that's how you get that long tail of success. So many enablement programs are like, you get big spikes. It's like, cool, we've done this. We've launched a new pitch. So I go onto my Gong recordings or my whatever CI platform I use, and I can see they're all using that pitch. But how do I know they're going to keep using it? And that's where these sort of metrics and these marginal gains come in, so that you get that long tail of success. You're going to get a spike, but how do you keep it going rather than a spike and it drops off and then you get nothing again after?
That makes a lot of sense. You sort of talked a little bit about sort of how to have that good cross-functional collaboration. What are some of the more common causes of misalignment? I think I'm talking about that across the 2 days here. What are some of those more common causes? And I guess, do you have any sort of, not quick fixes, but suggestions for listeners who maybe are suffering from that?
We don't need to talk about the goals bit. We spoke about that, Lem. I think for me, there's a lot of ambiguity. And I think this is common in this whole world, right? Ops and enablement is a relatively new function. Sales has existed for years, marketing, product, right? Finance, everyone knows what they do. But actually, when you're setting up, and most companies are setting up or evolving an ops and an enablement function, and there's a lot of ambiguity about who does what, and you see sort of two sides of the camp. You've got those people that, quite frankly, they just want to get rid of work. Like, no, you take it. And then the other person ends up taking everything and they drown. They can't do it, right? And they fail. Or you've got those that get protective and it's like so much job justification. It's like, no, I do this. And well, you might have done that, but should you be doing that is the question. Because when you are setting up a new function, when you're starting to build that out, you need to have absolute clarity. So I think removing that ambiguity is key, because having that only causes problems. But that has to be supported by communication. We all have to be coming at this from the right direction. You get, I see it a lot, right? You get systems people, data people that think enablement is just fluffy and training. And I'm going to build some pretty slides and stand up and talk at you. And it's so much more than that. And that lack of respect and understanding of their role can cause breakdowns in communication. Breakdowns in communication means you're never going to fix that ambiguity problem. And then you end up with either both of you coming at something at the same time and you both waste time or do it wrong, or you think I'm doing it, I think you're doing it, nobody does it. So I think common causes are definitely ambiguity, lack of communication, lack of goals, but I think communication fixes it all. You just need to talk.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess one of the things I'm wondering is, you touched on it there in terms of enablement and RevOps sort of being new roles and not having this, sales has been going on for however many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an advantage to that? Does that offer a degree of flexibility in the fact that enablement and RevOps do look different from company to company? Does that give you a bit of scope to put your own stamp on it, or do you see it as if you had that sort of history that would be more helpful to have?
I think for me, the way I approach it, there's a blueprint, there's a framework, right? But it's guidelines. I have documentation that I've written, which I could take from company to company, and there's probably a 70% overlap in what I've used from that framework in all of the 4 companies I've sort of done this and set this up. But you can't roll it out like for like. It's just not, because companies are different, priorities are different, needs are different. So I think the fact that enablement is new, if you go in without any idea, without any sort of framework, any sort of idea, you end up moving into more of a reactive world, because I'm asking you, I'm like, hey, what can I help with? What do you need? And all you're doing is I'm just picking up your tasks. Some of those tasks will be absolutely critical and valuable, and they should be sat with me. Other tasks will be stuff that nobody really knows what they do, because they're not quite sure what ops and enablement is. So if you don't know what enablement is, you just give stuff to it to do. So you've got to be clear about that. And then working with managers, like coaching is a part of enablement, but coaching is also part of the management team. Sales managers coach every single day. So you have to be really clear about where that line is. Where do you stop and start, so that you can actually sort of make sure that you're working together on it and not against each other.
That makes sense. And I guess, where do you sort of tend to draw that line, say with sales coaching, for example? Because that is one that we hear in the community quite a lot, whereas not necessarily friction, but like say confusion about where that line should be.
Yeah.
Where does that lie?
So it's interesting. I've literally just hired a new sales enablement manager that joins me in January, so can't wait for that. And She asked exactly that question. And my response to her was that at the moment, like, managers aren't coaching. They're doing it, right? Some of the time they're doing it based on gut feelings. Some of the time they're doing it based on data. Some of the time they're just doing it because someone's asked. They don't really know why. So my guidance to that person's been, what I want you to do is live in our conversational intelligence tool, understand the needs, understand the trends, and then you can advise the manager on coaching. But then there's a line, right? If you've got someone, it's a harsh world we live in, right? Sometimes people are put on performance improvement plans. And when you've got a manager that is maybe having a check-in on your performance improvement plan that at the end of this quarter, if I haven't met it, I'm out. For that manager to then coach you on a day-to-day basis is really hard because I might be feeling resentment. The relationship may be strained because of that. That's where enablement, I think, can come in because they are neutral. They're there to make you successful. Now, the manager wants you to be successful, but their sole job is to enable you to be successful. So I think that's a really nice day-to-day coaching is managed by sort of managers and one-to-ones. One-to-many coaching through sessions is normally enablement. And I think that performance improvement sort of plan area, performance management area, is where enablement and managers can almost swap roles and keep it neutral and unbiased, because performance improvement plans shouldn't be about exiting people. They should be about making them successful. And that's where enablement comes in my opinion.
I really like that. That's something I don't think we've had before in the podcast, but I really like that. It's a clear definition and hopefully it'll clear any confusion that any listeners have had.
And over time, right? Over time, people build out so much knowledge that they can help more on coaching, and managers' teams grow bigger. But I would love to say every sales manager only has 6 direct reports to keep them really efficient, but they don't. It goes 6, and then they inherit a couple more, and then they maybe pick up with another team, and all of a sudden they've got 10 direct reports. And when you get to that volume, it's really difficult to be coaching, managing, getting deals over the line, and that's again when you can lean on enablement. So again, it's case-by-case companies, but for me, what I explained first is my starting point, and then it will evolve over time.
That makes a lot of sense. And for our listeners, before we sort of wrap it up, do you have sort of one final takeaway, or if they can only bring away one thing from this episode on sort of improving cross-functional alignment in their organisation, what would it be? What would you sort of put to them?
I can wrap it up in one, but it's 2 really. It's goals and communication. Like, you're never going to get anywhere if you don't have aligned goals. Like, there's a million methodologies out there for businesses to create their goals. Whether you're talking OKRs, 4DX, whatever it is, you have to have goals that are truly aligned at the top. As soon as you break those goals down into functional goals, you're creating silos. Therefore, you're creating misalignment. So I think having aligned goals is absolutely key. And that only works with clear communication. Like, you're never going to get to a place of alignment and clarity if you're not communicating. And that's underpinned by everything you'd expect, respect, the sort of, understanding, the empathy, sympathy for their roles. So I think, goals and communication is absolutely the first 2 things that everyone should think about when they're talking about alignment.
Simon, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate this chat. I'll let you get back to the event. I know there's people sort of moving around now. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hope you enjoy the rest of the event as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast. Be sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice so you don't miss a thing. And if you're hungry for more sales enablement content, visit our website, salesenablementcollective.com, for articles, events, and an easy way to join our Slack community, home to thousands of your sales enablement peers.